Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we look at the case of a talented jazz musician who was killed over a drugs debt. It was heard in court that members of a drugs gang had chopped up a talented musician's body and tried to dissolve it in acid before burying his limbs within Hounslow Heath. The body of William Algar, who was 53, was left to rot for weeks before his decomposing head and torso were discovered by police in a flat in Norwell Road, Barnes, on January 3rd, 2020. It is believed that Mr Algar was stabbed to death as early as December 1st, 2019, before his limbs were transported to Hounslow Heath, West London, where they would be later found by a sniffer dog. The members of the drug gang were also involved and linked to the fatal stabbing of Ebrima Cham, who was 35. Mr Cham had suffered 12 knife wounds at an address in Grove Road, Hounslow, on December 19th, 2020. The gang's leader, Zemel Doob, who was 33, Simon Emmons, who was 41, and Amika Dawuda Wudu, who was 19, appeared at the Old Bailey to be sentenced for perverting the course of justice in relation to dispersing Mr Algar's body. The Old Bailey was told that Mr Algar was an able and talented musician who had lost everything because of his addiction to Class A drugs and mental health issues. William Algar, who was known as Blaise by his friends, had played with punk legends The Damned. Mr Algar, who was known as Willie in the music world, played on the band's hit single Grimly Fiendish in 1985, but was in the lineup for less than a year. As his chances of a successful career faded, he began using drugs and eventually ended up in the world of heroin and cocaine supply, where his nickname was known as Blaise. Mr Algar allowed other dealers to use his tiny flat in Norwell Road as a den for their trade or a trap house, and he was treated like a slave in the premises. Mr Algar, who was described by his family as a gentle man, had taken in a stray cat called Felix and was besotted by the animal, the Old Bailey was told. When he owed money for drugs, Dawuda Wudu threatened to harm Felix, who later disappeared. Mr Algar was so worried about his pet cat that he had rang police and told them of the threats that had been made to his cat and the drugs gang that were in his flat. The prosecutor, Crispin Aylett, told the court that according to the key prosecution witness, Philip Ross, Mr Algar had spoken disrespectfully to Mr Dawuda Wudu. The key prosecution witness, Mr Ross, had explained, he had told Blaise, "I'm not your bitch" or something. "If you keep talking to me this way, if this carries on, I will kill your cat." Mr Ross is under the impression that the argument had continued, and he believes as a result of this, the cat has been killed. Mr Algar was stabbed to death in early December, but he was not reported missing until January the 2nd. This was when the alarm was raised when he had failed to visit his 93-year-old grandmother at Christmas. When the police searched his flat, they found his head and torso wrapped in bin bags, old clothes, towels and knotted sheets in a blood-splattered living room. His head and arms were later recovered in Hounslow Heath by police dogs after Edmonds and the teenager had taken a cab there with limbs in a bulging suitcase. Parts of his body, including the genitals and anus, have never been recovered. A pathologist found that Mr Algar had no defensive injuries, and he may have been killed when he was asleep, face down, or incapacitated. Traces of drugs, including cocaine and morphine, were found in his bloodstream. By the time Mr Dawuda Wudu was arrested, he had been involved in the murder of Mr Cham, which had happened on the 19th of December 2019. Mr Cham, who was known as the Brim Reaper, was also a drug dealer who had a fearsome reputation of robbing others in the trade. He was known as a maniac who carried a gun at all times, and he had stolen drugs from Dubby's drugs business 4 different times. 3 killers stormed his flat in Grove Road, Hounslow, with a pirate dagger pretending to be Blaise and stabbed him with severe force in his kitchen. Some of the 11 injuries were inflicted when he was already dead. Mr Dawuda had also stabbed another victim who thought he was going to die in the attack, the court was told. Mr Dawuda was warned by the prison authorities that his phone calls would be tapped, but he was recorded telling his mother to move a zombie knife from the top of his wardrobe. He was also recorded telling his mother that he was considering pretending to be mad as a defense, and calling his mother the devil. "If I get so mad at something, I have to do something," he said. It was like something was saying, "Just do it, just do it." Mr Dawuda, Mr Edmonds, Mr Lusima and Mr Dubé each denied the extent of their involvement throughout the 7-week trial at the Old Bailey. Giving evidence, Mr Dawuda said he had no idea Mr Algar was dead until Mr Edmonds had told him and asked him to help get rid of the body. "I thought he was joking," the teenager said. He said he only agreed to help after his mother was threatened, and explained to the court how the sight of Mr Edmonds dismembering the victim had left him physically sick. He explained to the court he was cutting him with a knife, a Rambo knife. Blaise was lying on the floor in the bathroom. I was in and out the bathroom seeing what he was doing. Simon was severing his legs. I've never seen anything like that before. I had vomited a couple of times on the hallway floor and I had to clean that up. However, Mr Edmonds claimed he had nothing to do with dismembering Mr Algar's body or murdering Mr Champ. He said he had got a taxi with the teenager and a 44-year-old known as Mark Harding, and he had no idea the suitcase they were carrying was stuffed with Mr Algar's limbs. Mr Edmonds said he couldn't remember why he was in the taxi that had transported them to the shallow grave on Hounslow Heath. Mr Dub and Mr Dawuda blamed Mr Edmonds for the murder of Mr Champ and claimed they were at the flat but did not see the fatal struggle. Mr Dawuda claimed that Mr Edmonds said afterwards, "It was either him or me." The court heard how Mr Algar's body was initially left to rot before Dawuda and Mr Edmonds returned to the flat with Mr Janayo Lusima, who was 19, to try and dispose of the body. Analysis of Mr Edmonds' phone found that he had searched for how to dissolve a body in acid, similar to the Breaking Bad series, with Mr Lusima travelling to a nearby Tesco Express to purchase cleaning products. Meanwhile, Mr Dawuda and Mr Edmonds had chopped up the body before wrapping up Mr Algar's limbs in bedsheets and placing them in a hold-all suitcase before taking a taxi to Hounslow Heath. Mark Harding, who was 45, had been ordered by the gang to dig holes within a specific area of the heath, where he would meet Mr Edmonds and Mr Dawuda and direct them where to bury the body. Mr Algar was reported missing by his mother. Her Honour Judge Wendy Joseph QC told the court, "The utter disrespect which stands in the way they treated his body is beyond words." Judge Joseph QC described the gang's actions as barbaric violence, as she had sentenced 5 of the men. Mr Dubé of Hounslow was jailed for 28 years. Mr Edmonds, of no fixed address, was sentenced to 31 years imprisonment for the murder of Mr Abrima and perverting the course of justice in relation to disposing the body of Mr Algar. Mr Dawuda of no fixed address was sentenced to 31 years for the same offence, along with a section 18 with wounding to intent to relation to stabbing a 3rd victim. Mr Lusima of Kensington was jailed for 3 years and 3 months for perverting the course of justice. Mr Harding, who told the court he believed he was digging holes at Hounslow Heath for the burial of a dog, was jailed for 3 years and 3 months. What are your opinions of the crimes that were committed by the gang? Do you think the judge got all the sentences right for this crime? Do you believe Mr Harding really believed that he was digging holes for the burial of a dog? What are your opinions on no one being sentenced for the murder of Mr Algar, but others in the gang being found guilty of perverting the course of justice by chopping up his body. Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more Street Crime UK content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, stay safe.